everybody. I need to quickly get something out of the way. And here we go. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the stream on Twitch and YouTube. Today, I want to dive... Well, let me get that out of the way. A little bit late. Oh, 2 minutes late. I want to dive into web animations because that is something where I suck at. I'm not good at it. Definitely never wasn't a topic I ever had like a deep dive in. And so today I want to explore various options that exist for doing web animations or animations on the web. So there would be, of course, CSS, there would be JavaScript libraries, the Web Animations API, and all that stuff. That's the goal, and that is what I want to explore today. And we'll see how far we get. I will say, I just, today was a busy day, so I'm not fully settled in yet. So forgive me if I still seem a bit confused. I'm good. Thank you so much, Junai. I'm good. Just a bit. It's been a hectic day. But now I'm all settling down for the stream and excited to dive excited to dive into the animations thing. And do I have a GraphQL course? I have not. And with GraphQL, I feel a bit like there was this huge hype. I don't know, maybe in 2018, 19. And I considered creating a course back then, but I never got that much into it. So I don't have a strong expertise. I haven't really built anything with GraphQL. So no, I got no course on that and also got no plans. So let's dive in, shall we? Now, I did not prepare everything I wanted to prepare, but we'll get there. So let's get rid of that. Web animations, and with that I mean really like all kinds of animations we can do on websites, because we got a couple of options there. And one option, which I guess most people are familiar with, at least I am, is CSS. So there we have transitions, the transition property, and then we have the animation property, and we'll explore both today. And that is what I have used a bit, but even there, I wouldn't consider myself an expert. It's just something I know at least, which is not the case for the other areas, because of course you can also do animations with JavaScript. There you could use a naive approach with set interval, which is not recommended. You can use request animation frame, which is better, but also a bit more difficult, I guess, kind of, to use. And that already is something where I don't know a lot. And well, then of course we got the web animation API, which is built into the browser, which we can use with JavaScript to trigger and control animations. And then we also, of course, have, well, that's maybe a separate part, a separate point here. We also have libraries. So here we got stuff like the GZAP library. So that would be this one here. Then we got, for example, the motion library, which some might know from React, and of course many more. Yeah, so that's roughly what we have, and of course there are more libraries, but that is what I want to try to explore today, and we'll see how far we get. Am I preparing a course for web animation? No, I'm not. I really just like using these streams for sometimes for diving into stuff I want to learn. So I, well, take the time to dive into that and take you along on the right, and it's also good for me because typically there are people in the chat that know this stuff better than I do, so it helps me with learning. I got no plans for a Node.js course update right now. GSEP course, well, I'm just learning it, so probably not anytime soon. Am I cross-playing Theo? No, I don't think so. I don't hope so. Nothing against Theo, but yeah, no. How long do you usually spend reading the docs when you're learning something new? Do you go through everything or do you stop at a certain point? So when I go through the docs for learning something new, typically I spend quite some time, but I skip through them really quick. I just gather pieces here and there because since I typically get some experience already, depending on what I learn, of course, I often just want to dive into specific aspects. So I don't like read them like a book, but instead I dive into specific parts. Yeah, so Angular course updated to Angular 21. Well, Angular 21 didn't change anything groundbreaking. Zoneless mode is now the default, and I covered zoneless mode already in my huge update last year, so Angular is still Angular, and the course with the big update I released last year is really fully up to date to all the signal stuff and so on. So you're making stream and topic, you have no experience and knowledge just because you have audience. Great teacher. Well, CLK, maybe that stream just isn't for you. This is not a stream where I tell you that I'm teaching you something where I'm an expert in. Instead, we're exploring something together. And that might be interesting for some, because guess what? I'm not an expert in everything. And I'm not interested in just doing streams on topics I know well. Now, it would be bad if I were doing a stream on something I don't know, giving you the impression that I know it, but that's not the fact. This is a stream where I learn something new, and you can watch or you can leave. That is totally up to you, of course. So you should probably leave. Anyways, let's dive in. And let's dive in by, I'll quickly create a new project. And I'm just thinking, which kind of project do I best create to play around? Maybe just a React project. And I'll bring it onto the screen in just a second, no worries. So here we go. Okay. So let's bring in, hello. Can I move this? Yeah. Okay, here's cursor. And then here we got the project, and that's really just like a Vite React project I created here. So, okay, let's start the dev server. I don't need it here. Whoops, that's the wrong one. That is what I want. Yeah, and CLK, if you're just here to like argue and do stuff like that, goodbye. So that's not really something I'm interested in, sorry. Okay, so let's see. So let's start with CSS transition. So obviously, this is like a standard Vite React project. And in there, we already, I guess, have a little animation. And that's the stuff I still know. Yeah, so here we got an animation. That's one of two ways of animating with CSS. You have the transition prop, you have the animation property. And actually, I want to start with transition because that's even easier to understand. So if we add like a little, do we have tailwind here? I don't think we have that, right? So let's bring in tailwind real quick. And do that. And do that. Just so that I can use that for styling, because I actually prefer that. Yeah, and let's clean this up. Let's start from scratch. Clean all that up. And okay, we should be good to go, I guess. Okay, so here we go. And now let's just add a little div here. Okay, so we got this, and obviously just some quick and dirty stuff here. And I want to get like a red box in there. That's what I'm doing here. BG red. Okay, so now we got a red box. Awesome. By the way, I'll get back to chat and answer all those questions in just a second. So one thing we can do, so if I add like hover blue, obviously, unsurprisingly, this gets blue. And one way of animating, of course, which most of you probably know, is to add a transition. And then you can, well, this is tailwind, of course, but you can specify with the transition property which kind of properties you want to transition, so which properties you want to animate. And transition all, for example, applies the targets all properties, which means if you change any property value that is animatable, not all of them are, then it will be animated, and you can then specify a duration here with tailwind with that class, otherwise with the transition duration property. And now if I hover over this, this still switches to blue, but it does so over 300 milliseconds, adding a nice little transition. And obviously we could ramp this up to a second, and then it would be much slower. So yeah, that is probably not new. But that's one way of animating with CSS. Now, another way of animating with CSS is using that animation property. And for that, I'll add a class rotating. So a normal class, not Tailwind, even though they have animations built in too, but I want to build it from scratch. And we can add the animation property to such a class to animate anything that has that class on it. Now, of course, the question is, what do we put here? And the answer is the animation we want to play, but we need to build that, and we do that with add keyframes. And here cursor is spoiling all the fun by suggesting it, but you use that special add keyframe syntax. Then you pick a name for your animation, and that can be any name you want. And then you can define which properties you want to animate, though typically that is the transform property, which then in turn allows you to apply different transformations to the element it's applied to. And you can specify the starting value. You can also leave that out to start from the default, and the to value to to control where to animate to. So for example, to rotate this by 360 degrees in the end. And then you could use rotate here, then define over which duration you want to rotate, like 2 seconds. Then the easing, so if it should start fast and end slow, or start slow and end fast, and so on. So here I'll use ease in and out so that it starts slow and ends slow. And infinite means it keeps on going. And there are a couple of other things you can specify as well, but that is like a standard animation. And now we, of course, just need to add that class, the rotating class, to the element we want to rotate. So for example, here to this div. And with that, it is spinning. And you can see it starts, it then stops slow, and then it starts again because I have infinite. And if I had not that ease in out thing, but instead linear, then it should just keep on spinning, and we don't even see it stop and begin, because it doesn't decelerate and accelerate. So yeah, now that can get a bit annoying, so I will remove that. But that is CSS animation, so transition and animation. And that is where my knowledge now stops, much to the disappointment of CLK. But we can also animate with JavaScript. And there are different ways of animating with JavaScript. There is, well, let's start simple. We're in a React app, but I want to use just JavaScript, so I'll use useEffect to kind of break out of React here. And what we could do now, of course, and that is a naive approach, is we could use setInterval to do something like every second or every 100 milliseconds, let's say. So let's say every 100 or every 10 milliseconds, or every like 20 milliseconds maybe, to go for 50 FPS. We want to move that element, let's say. So since I'm in React, I'll get a hold of that element with the useRef. So the box is this here with ref box. And then I can go into my set interval here. And then I can say, okay, if we have a ref to the box, we can transform it, we can rotate it. Or if I want to move it, we could say we want to translate X along the X-axis. And we want to do that every 20 milliseconds. So now if I do that, I think that should work. Yeah. And it does move a little bit. It's not super easy to see. But yeah, you can see it's now moving around randomly every 20 milliseconds. But that is not really a good approach, because setInterval has a couple of disadvantages. For example, it keeps on going if the tab is not active, and you don't want that. That's just unnecessary performance wasted. It can also get out of sync. You can't rely on it firing every 20 milliseconds, so exactly every 20 milliseconds. So it's not a good approach to use that for animation. So that's why we have request animation frame. And request animation frame, that is just a function we can use to also define a function that should be called. But here we don't specify an interval. Instead, the browser will call it for us, keeping it in sync with the refresh rate of the monitor. And what we typically do to create a loop, because we don't specify an interval, is we use recursion, as we can see it here. So actually, I'll just grab that and put that into my useEffect here. And do some TypeScript autocompletion with help of cursor. And then here it's box. Well, actually, let's check. If not box current, we return. What's the issue here? Style does not exist. Yeah, but that should not be null here. Oh yeah, it's box current, of course. So now what we're doing here, we're calling request animation frame. And we then pass the step function as an argument to it. And then in that function, we calculate how much time has elapsed since it was last called. And again, typically the browser will try to call that in sync with our refresh rate. And then we can calculate that delta. We can use that for deriving our animation to move it by a certain amount of pixels every frame and so on. And then we use recursion here to make sure that we keep on animating. So with that, it's again moving, and I can still hover over it for the transition, but now this is the better way of animating in JavaScript with request animation frame. And yeah, I will also come to some libraries. So first things first, let's take a look at the chat, because now I've been talking a lot and there have been a lot of questions and comments. So, where was I? I really appreciate you start covering topics more related to AI. That's what I'm working on all day. Yeah, so I mean, AI is here to stay. We're all using AI. I'm using AI for all the projects I'm working in. So yeah, I definitely cover it more because I use it more. And I definitely plan on well, keeping on covering that. Any plans for a data science machine learning course? Not really, because that is not something where I would consider myself an expert. I'm using AI as a developer, but I'm absolutely not an expert in data science or machine learning or building AI models. Debate. I've learned React, Vue, and Svelte. I really like Svelte, and my colleagues debate about why don't I use React. I'm building a startup for myself. All frameworks generate JavaScript and push it to the browser. The client or user just sees the website. Does the framework really matter, as they all do similar things? Well, the framework does not matter in general, because as you wrote, they can all do similar things. But of course, most companies have a certain tech stack that's getting used, and for most companies that's React, I guess. For some, probably also Angular, and then there's less companies using Vue. So if you have the choice, if you're building your own projects, you can absolutely use whatever you want, and I don't see any disadvantage there, other than maybe there being a bit less learning resources, maybe less libraries you could use. That's something to consider. But the frameworks themselves, you can absolutely use what you liked. I like your burger projects. Wow, that's these are the good old times. Yeah, that was fun. I will say that. I love your content, by the way. It took quite a few years. Your courses. Yeah, thank you so much. And by the way, so many nice comments. Thank you all so much. It means a lot to me. Super happy that my content was and is helpful to all of you. And of course, I'll try to keep it up. So yeah. I'm really interested in the streams, but I can't watch them all in line. Why don't you save them for those who want to watch later? I do save them for those who want to watch later. And you can find them all on Maximilian Schwarzmüller Extended. They're just not on my main channel, because my understanding is that this will mess up the YouTube algorithm. But on Maximilian Schwarzmüller Extended, you find every single one of them of my past streams. And this stream here will also be online tomorrow. So I do save them. Yeah, years ago in the React course, the Burger Builder. Nice to see you, second time of the day. So you did watch my YouTube video. So nice. Thank you so much. So I loved your Golang course. That's nice to hear. Golang is an amazing language, in my opinion. Yeah, I really liked working with, like working with that. Please do a stream on Claude Code. Yeah, might be fun. I agree. I'm using Claude Code and Cursor quite a lot. So yeah, a stream might make sense. Can you show us how we could chain animations to create complex scenes? Well, I'll try to get there, because that is something I want to figure out in this stream also. Thanks for the CSS animation tutorial. I know the person who helped Mozilla write the web animation spec. Oh, that's pretty cool. Am I using libraries? I will use libraries. How am I annotating marks on the screen? That's this app here, Demo Pro. I installed that years ago. It gets the job done. I think it's only available for macOS, but I really like it for having these annotations. Maximilian that taught me React, best content man, keep it up. I'll try my best. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for the amazing feedback. Can you remove legacy content of your React course and add big final React project? The problem is with Udemy, removing content is super hard, because you got quite a lot of companies that want to use an older version, because they're internally using older versions. So I have aggressively removed content in the past, and that has not gone so well, which is why I'm super careful with this now. So let's move on. So we had a look at CSS transition animation. We had a look at set interval request animation frame. Now let's take a look at the web animation API, and then we'll go a bit slower once we get into the libraries and so on, because that is where we can build the more complex stuff. You could, of course, also all build it from scratch with just request animation frame and so on, but just as with lots of other areas in web development, it typically, or it often makes sense to use a library so that you can focus on what makes up your application, and you don't have to like reinvent the wheel, especially if you got no experience there. So what I find quite interesting is the Web Animations API, because that is an API that's built into the browser that has quite decent browser support as far as I know. Let's see, do we have like the browser support table somewhere? Which in the end allows you to programmatically do animations in JavaScript without without the disadvantages you would have with set interval or other approaches. You get great performance and you get a convenient API to use. So if we take a look at, can I use web animation API, or web animations, I guess, we can see that support is pretty good, 94%, and it's really only Internet Explorer. And to be honest, I mean, yeah, some of us still have to build applications for users that are using Internet Explorer, but I'm thankfully not one of them. So yeah, I really don't care about Internet Explorer anymore. And other than that, that looks pretty good. Pretty good support here, especially all the mainstream browsers here. So yeah. And also, of course, Safari on iOS, Chrome on Android. So yeah, we can use that. And I want to get into it here. Meet the Web Animations API. So here we see essentially what I built with CSS. And now we can build something similar with JavaScript, as it seems. And the first thing we need is to create a keyframe object corresponding to our CSS keyframe block. So let's do that here. And I'll drag that over here. And we'll try to rebuild that rotation animation with JavaScript. Now I will get rid of that code here. I will keep use effect. Maybe creating a React project wasn't the best idea because I'm not really writing React code right now, but maybe later. So in use effect, I want to have my rotation keyframes, which is really just an array of objects where I define, as it seems, the different states of my animation. And I specify certain CSS properties like transform or color, which I want to animate, and then we'll pass that array on to the Web Animations API, I would guess. I have actually worked with the Web Animations API, but that has been many, many years ago. So to keep it simple, we could have these two keyframes, which is, of course, in the end, what I had here too, right? So that's the CSS version. And of course, for a simple animation like this, it probably doesn't make sense to use the JavaScript approach, but I want to get into the Web Animations API. So here we go. We define that. We also need to create an object of timing properties. Okay. So we got our timing, and here we can have a duration, and then iterations and easing. That's, yeah, iterations, infinity, and then as it seems also easing. At least cursor tells me that this is the case. Cursor also spoiled already how we will probably continue, but I'll read through that article. And then we get all these pieces together by in the end reaching out to the element we want to animate and by calling animate. Okay, so I shouldn't have deleted that ref. We need it again. Well, I didn't delete it down there, which is good. So then we have our box current. We call animate, and that is now coming from the browser. So that's not a library, that's nothing like this. This is just a method that exists on DOM objects, just as they, for example, have append child and all those other methods like add event listener and so on. So animate can be called to run an animation, and it takes an array of keyframes, as it seems, as a first argument, or property indexed keyframes. Not sure what that is. Is that keyframes that have a name, maybe? And then we have an options object or a number, I guess, if you just want to specify a duration. I could imagine that this is the case. So here, these are my options. Is there like a TypeScript type for that? Keyframe animation options, as it seems. And this here is an array of keyframes. Okay. Okay, so that's good. Good that we're using TypeScript. So for every keyframe, we can also specify an individual easing to control how the animation will behave around that keyframe. So when we reach that step in the animation in the end, because a keyframe is just a step in the animation. And offset, is that useful for staggering animations maybe? We'll see. What else do we have in the options? A delay, a direction, which I guess is something like to play it in reverse and so on. Okay. Fill, we have that in CSS2. Forwards means that once the animation stops, we stay in the state we had at the end of the animation versus going back to the initial state, which would be the default, at least in CSS. But it doesn't matter here since we keep on going infinitely. So yeah, with that, we should be rotating again, I guess. Yeah, and we are. So we are rotating again, and this time now with the web animations API here. Okay, so that all makes sense. Controlling playback with play, pause, reverse. And that's now the interesting part, because obviously we wouldn't have needed the web animations API just to rotate this thing. We did that before here. But my understanding of why you would use the web animations API is that you now have more control. For example, you can play, pause, reverse, and so on. So we could add a button here. Let's add a little div, and in there a button. And then we can add a function, handle pause, or handle toggle animation, I guess. And in there we can use some state to check what our current animation state is. So we can have like, yeah, an is animating state. That makes a lot of sense. And then here we want to call set is animating and set it to the opposite of what it was, using this proper syntax for that. And then, yeah, well, this is now actually, that's not really a super clean approach, to be honest. And especially it's confusing because this state update won't be processed by the time we are here. So we probably, in reality, would use an extra ref. Or a variable instead of using state here. Or what I'll do here, it's also not super clean, but good enough for this demo. We can use another effect, which will run if is animating changes. And in there, we check if is animating is true. In this case, we want to play the animation. And for that, we need to get a hold of it. So I need a ref that stores the animation, and animate returns an animation. So here I want to have animation current and store that. And yeah, this can be undefined as it seems. So let's add undefined as a type here. And then here in this use effect, we can check if we are animating and we have an animation object. In this case, we can use animation current play. Otherwise, we can use pause. And now this would allow us to add a click listener here to start and stop that animation. Where's my button? Hello, where's my button? Ah, here it is. Okay, let's make this a bit prettier. Yeah, not super pretty, but we can start. And now I can't press it anymore because there is that rotating thing in the way. Yeah, and the start and stop, and I should add even more gap here to make sure the button is always in a safe space. But yeah, now I can start and stop, and that is what we can do with the Web Animations API. And that's one of the reasons why you would use it over CSS. Sure, with CSS you could also remove and re-add the class, but you can do more than just start and stop. But even that is of course maybe a bit nicer if you can just call a method instead of adding or removing classes. Though in the case of React, to be honest, this is kind of a dirty workaround here, using a use effect to run when that state changes. So here maybe removing and adding the CSS class would be preferable because it's more declarative. But yeah, the error probably is that I created a React project because I really want to use the imperative way here. What are your thoughts about the RSC vulnerabilities revealed yesterday? Well, to be very honest, I haven't read super deep into that topic because I don't have any live applications that would have been affected by that. So, I mean, the good thing is that we had a quick reaction by, for example, Cloudflare, which included a rule in their web application firewall to automatically block that vulnerability or attackers from exploiting that vulnerability. That the vulnerability details were published so everybody can update. And yeah, I mean, vulnerabilities will always be a thing as long as we write code, right? So it is what it is. Do you have any courses with RAG? No, but I also would love to do that because RAG is indeed super exciting. And I have quite a few internal and soon also hopefully not just internal applications that leverage RAG. And I'm a huge fan of building RAG-based applications, so a course is definitely not unlikely. Agentic coding engineering will be the future for developers. I think so. I think so that using AI and using it not for vibe coding, but for agentic engineering is the way to go. Yeah. For me, it's very clear that AI is a super useful tool. So I can only recommend using it and trying to get the best out of it, not relying entirely on it, not lose your skill, not lose your ability to think for yourself, but instead really like use it as an extra tool that can help you. I think that is the future. Really love your content. I was wondering if you are planning to do a Spring Boot course. No, I'm not a Spring developer at all, so no course plan on that. Hi Max, this is my first time chatting on one of your live streams. I've been following your courses for years and they've helped me so much. You're truly my favorite instructor. Keep it up. Thank you so much. Welcome to the stream. I hope it's interesting. Today I'll just explore something where I don't know a lot about web animations, and I want to get better and learn a bit more. So hopefully that's interesting. So welcome everybody, of course, and thanks for all the kind messages. What's the best approach to respect users' reduced motion preference and stop animations for better web accessibility? So in CSS, it's of course that reduced motion. I can't remember that for the sake But here, prefers reduced motion. So in CSS, you want to do that. The media query, that's the name. You want to do that. And if a user has a certain preference, adjust your animations or maybe even disable them entirely. For programmatic, for the web animations API, I'm not sure if we maybe have a method we can call there to get that information. Or if we need to retrieve it another way. But of course, you should try to store that information and take it into account if you have a site that is very heavy on animations. And I mean, my take at least is if you have a site that only has a few harmless animations sprinkled over the screen and not everything's changing all the time, you probably are fine. But of course, if you are doing a lot of stuff that can be irritating for users that are sensible to that, you wanna like use the CSS media query or detect the preference in JavaScript and then set a certain flag, a certain variable to have reduced animations there. Do you like physics? Oh, actually, I mean, I like the idea that we have physics. I'm personally not good in physics. I've always liked math, and I was very good at math in school. But physics, I was only okay at that. Don't know why. So yeah, I like the concept, but I'm impressed by people that are truly experts there because I'm certainly not one of them. Your React course is good. So happy to hear that. Thank you so much. And do you planning to do a Nest.js course? No, I haven't really worked with Nest.js since 2000, I don't know, 18. So no course plan on that. So let's continue. So we can pause, we can start. We could also call reverse to, well, reverse the animation. What else can we do? Let's see. Oh, wow, they got an interactive thing here. Yeah. Finish skips to the end, cancel aborts and removes its effects. So the difference to pause, I guess, is that cancel will clean up everything about its state that has been stored. Yeah, makes it run backwards. Update playback rate. We can do this instead of setting. Okay. Persisting animation styles. When animating elements, a common use case is to persist the final state of the animation after the animation is finished. The fill mode forwards, that is what I mentioned before. It's not recommended to use fill modes to persist the effect of an animation indefinitely for two reasons. The browser has to maintain the state of the animation while it's still active, so the animation continues to consume resources even though it's no longer animating. Styles applied by animations have a higher precedence in the cascade, so it can be difficult to override them. A better approach is to use the animation commit styles method. Oh. So okay, that's interesting. So I guess, how do we best do that? I guess if we had a different setup here where we went to 240 degrees, so not a full spin, and then we could use fill forwards, and we don't have an infinite amount of iterations. Now what would happen is it would start and then it would stop automatically. So I haven't stopped it. It's technically still playing, but it's done. And we can maybe even like reduce this to just 60 degrees to make this even more obvious. So now over 2 seconds, it's just spinning by 60 degrees and then it's stopping. But the problem is now that this state in which it's stuck here doesn't change visually, but it's still in the animation. So as I understand it, and that's something I learned right now, when I'm animating with JavaScript here, I want to call animation commit styles to finalize this, so to say. I just don't know when or how do I best call this. Is there a callback when it's done? automatically removing filling animations. It's possible to trigger a large number of animations on the same element. So I wonder, is the idea that I do something like a set timeout for, let's say, 2000 milliseconds, so the duration, and after that I call not cancel, but instead commit styles. So now it plays and then it stops, and now it's stuck here, but now it's properly cleaned up. Might be, yeah. Getting information out of animations. Yeah, so we can use the animation object to get values. So I guess here we could say animation current, and then what have we got here? Get computed timing. What's that? Let's see, what do I get here? Okay. Okay, so that is some information I can gather, like the duration it had. Got it. Is there also something like... Oh yeah, we can listen for it to finish. And then probably that would be the better place to clean up. So not with a timeout, but instead, I guess like this. When it finishes, I want to commit the styles. So now if I do that, it still finishes, but the cleanup and where it's locked in is now done once it's done. And that's another nice thing, of course, about JavaScript controlled animations, because you can listen to their state, react to their state, and of course also change the state, as you saw with start and stop. And with CSS, that's not really possible. With the Web Animations API, it's quite straightforward. So if I had another box, so there is another box here. Let's make it smaller. Let's make it like 30. And let's actually, and this one here too, let's make this one smaller too. So 50 and 30, and this one here should be, let's say, yellow. Okay, so we get yellow. Now let's say this one should start animating when the first one, the red one, is done. Obviously, this will now get a bit messy here, but what we could do is we could add another function, start animation. We could get a ref to that second box. So here, that's box 2. And in start animation, we can define our animation, or actually we can define this once, I guess, if we want to use the same one. So we can do that outside of the component function. Of course, assuming it should be the same animation, which it doesn't have to be. But then we could say box 2 current animate. When start animation is called, we can call start animation here, for example. We can probably also go here and actually paste in the timing, but set the iterations here to infinity so that this animation will keep on going. So now I try to start that second animation when the first animation is done. So initially nothing happens, but now I can start. And ideally that would have started when that stopped. So that was my idea. And I wonder why that's not happening. this is getting called, right? Let's see. Okay, so I guess finish is not getting called. Maybe. Why is finish not getting called? What else do we have here? Is finish not the right one? Why is finish not getting called? Maybe because it should finish when the time's over. Maybe we'll learn about that. Callbacks and promises. CSS animations and transitions have their own event listeners. On finish is the event handler for the finish event and can be triggered manually with finish. Okay, but is that not called automatically? The finish event is fired when the animation finishes playing, either when the animation completes naturally or when the animation finish method is called. Okay, but I wonder, why is that not happening for me here? We set up that event listener. Oh, because that is not set at this point. It's set here, I guess. We start that animation here. Thereafter, we have an animation object, so then we can call this. So now I guess it's working. Yeah, so now the yellow box starts spinning, and I guess something's wrong about my setup here. Maybe fill should be auto here. Not sure if that is it. Oh, I guess it's the fact that I only rotate by 60 degrees. So of course, technically I should set up a different set of keyframes here where I rotate by 360 degrees. And now if I do that, it should hopefully like keep on spinning. Yeah. Okay, so that's working. Hi, sorry if my questions not belong to this course. I'm wondering if you're going to make any updates on Udemy courses on JavaScript. Well, in general, I'm considering and doing updates all the time. Now, I don't update every course every second. Something could be updated, also because my experience has been that there are many students, especially also companies, that sometimes want older versions. But of course, I try to do the big important updates, like the TypeScript course update I did this year. But right now, I got no updates planned to JavaScript courses for the very near future, like the next 2 weeks or so. But in general, I try to find the right balance there. Yeah. I'm on the use effect section in the React course. Yeah, I hope it's helpful. Have there been any changes which might have become outdated? No. The use effect section, everything there is totally up to date. And the React course in general, what you learn there is fully up to date with the latest version of React. I even included a brand new section last year when React 19 was released. So it's all in there. Okay, so I got that. And that's how we can, for example, build staggering animations, I guess, that we listen to the end of one animation and then start the next one. Yeah, so that makes sense. Well, what else do we have here? API concepts, core concepts, animation objects, animation effects. Keyframe formats. Yeah, so that's essentially what you could specify in CSS as well. But what's interesting is this alternative way here, I guess. So we could specify multiple keyframes where every object represents one step in the animation, like the opacity going from 1, which is fully opaque, fully visible, to almost invisible with a certain easing, and then to fully invisible. So that we have that in-between step. We could specify these 3 steps. Or as it seems, we could just specify one object here instead of an array of objects, an array of steps, and then for these properties have arrays instead. So kind of reverse it, swap that. And then we have the different steps here, which is nice to know. So translated to my example here, I guess here, instead of having an array of objects, I could just have an object where transform is set to an array with the two values I wanna in the end animate from and to. So with that, the result should be the same, but now I use this alternative syntax, which is nice to know. Implicit to from. The browser can infer the start or end state of an animation by using the current state. By default, if a single keyframe is provided, it's treated as the end state. Yeah, okay. I mentioned that before with CSS. Offset represents the keyframe offset as described below. The offset of the keyframe between 0 and 1, this is equivalent to specifying start and end state in percentage. Oh, okay, that simply means in that entire time period over which the animation plays. So the 2 seconds, for example. With offset, I can define when a certain keyframe is active. So in this notation here, if I had offset at 0.5, I read that as the first half of that time, nothing happens because this keyframe only becomes active after this. So now if I press start, nothing happens for a second, and then it starts and only plays for a second because that's my offset here. So we could use that to add a delay. So what else do we have? Waiting for an animation to complete before stopping. Listen. Yeah, okay, so we can do something when it finishes. We saw that. Stacking context. Okay, yeah, so that's the Web Animations API. And I guess you could do all kinds of crazy stuff with that. Well, I don't just guess that. Obviously, you can animate all kinds of things. But as pretty much always, when things get more complex, you often reach for a library. So that's what I want to explore next, libraries. And there are plenty of libraries that could be used for animation, as I understand it. 2 libraries I want to take a look at here is the Motion library and the GZAP library. The Motion library is a library some maybe might already know. It was formerly called Framer Motion, and it was a React-only library. Now it's called Motion, and now it's not just React. Instead, now if you take a look at the docs, you can use it for React, but also for JavaScript or for Vue, as it seems. And the pitch of this library is in the end that they simplify creating complex animations. That's the idea, and that's what I want to dive in right now. Now, since I'm using React, I'll of course dive into the React docs here, and will install it as a first step. And now it will make more sense to have a React project because I'll work less against it and more with it. So I guess I'll save this as app old. And then in my app.tsx file, I'll actually clean up all that code here so that I can start from scratch with the Motion library. Excuse me. So let's remove all that like this. Okay, so now we just got this UI, which does nothing. Now I have worked a bit with Motion. Also recently, but I typically always use just the same set of limited features. And it's been quite some time since I had like a deep dive into Motion, so I forgot most of it. So a lot of that will be new to me again, or kind of new, I guess. So what I know is motion, when you installed it, does have that motion object, which you import from motion react here. And that object, in the end, gives you access to all these HTML elements, like a div, but also buttons and, well, all of them. And you can use them for animating. So that renders a normal div, but under the hood, this div now has certain extra props and extra features you can use to animate it. For example, it has an animate prop now, which a normal div has not, of course. So this div down there has no animate prop, but the motion div has. And here you can specify CSS properties you want to animate. And my understanding from what I read in the docs in the past is that you can even animate properties with motion with that package that aren't animatable with just CSS, because obviously the package is doing a lot of stuff under the hood. So if I set this to opacity 1, I guess nothing happens. But I think, but something will happen if we also set the initial property, which is also new, which is also provided by div, which allows you to define an initial state. So the state you want to start at, like the starting keyframe, if you want to call it like this. And then this is the value you want to animate to. So we start fully transparent, animate to, and then there is a transition prop, which allows you to configure that animation. Like, for example, specify a duration. So 2 seconds. I think duration is in seconds. We'll see. So now you see it starts transparent and then it fades in over 2 seconds or over 10 seconds. So now it's slowly fading in. And of course, there are other things we can configure as well. Quite a lot, actually. Wow. Oh, I guess we can specify different transitions for different CSS properties. We can also define the easing function. So again, that's how fast it should start and stop. So the acceleration and deceleration. And there you got more than with just CSS. So we could, for example, I don't know, use circ in out, whatever that is. Okay, so now it starts later and then kind of speeds up, I guess. Yeah. Okay, so that's that. That's the motion element, the motion component, or that object that gives you access to all these animatable HTML elements or JSX elements, I guess. So that's that. Now, of course, the great thing about having this is that now we can declaratively animate. So let's say we want to start this animation. And actually here I want to rotate from 0 to 360. And we don't have to use transform here. We can directly target rotate. And I want to do this over 5 seconds. And I'll just use good old ease in out. But I only want to do that after this button is clicked. So now with that library, what we can do is, we can manage some state. Let's import this. We can update the state with handle start animation. So on click on this button should fire this function. And then here, I want to set my rotation value to 360 or 0, depending on this state. Now, I'm not sure if initial is even important now. I don't think it is. Because that means if is animating is false, which it initially is, that is 0. The rotation is 0. But if it's true, it's 360. And because it's such a motion diff and we're using the animate prop, that change will be animated with the settings for the transition we have here. At least that is my understanding. So now if I click start, hello, yeah, it starts. It starts really slow. Probably because of that easing function. If I have linear here, I think it starts immediately. Yeah, kind of. It also, wow. Okay, so it's, that is a bit surprising. I think linear should have, why is it still like accelerating really slow and then suddenly like speeding up. That doesn't make too much sense for me with linear. What if I remove that? What if I remove that entirely? I know that the motion library applies some default transitions. Like they try to simulate physics. So have like realistic, in quotes, animations that kind of transport the feeling of mass and like a real object being moved. So it looks like this is the default animation we get here. I just wonder why I can't change it with my transition here. What if I set this to 1 second? Is it totally ignoring the transition? Well, let's continue. So yeah, we saw the enter animation with initial already. Then, yeah, I also read about that in the past. You got like the extra while hover and while tap animations, which make it a bit easier to apply certain animations if you're hovering over it or tapping on it, so that you don't have to like manually set up an event listener and change some state. But instead, if you know that a certain property should be changed and the change should be animated, when you hover or tap, you can use these helper properties, which is of course super convenient. But I wonder how I can configure this. So let's take a look at the animation overview. So yeah, we get the motion element. Yeah, we got the animate property. We saw that. We learned about enter animations. Motion can animate any CSS value. So even, as I mentioned before, values that are normally not, or properties that are normally not animatable. And we can directly specify rotate and so on. That's all nice. I just want to learn how I can configure that animation. We can also animate with CSS variables. That's nice. Transitions. So by default, motion will create appropriate transitions for snappy animations based on the type of value being animated. So yeah, it has like snappy defaults. That's nice, but I still wonder why I got that weird animation. Maybe that is just a default for... Oh, I guess, yeah, I guess. So the thing that happens is, as I understand it, it still has its default way of playing that animation. And probably there still is some easing going on, but the fact that this generally starts slow and so on, that I think is baked in for when you rotate, when you animate a rotation. Because clearly I am setting a duration and a easing, and I still got that weird animation. But we probably will get to this section where we can change this. So we can also have keyframes here. So I guess if we are animating, I could have keyframes like this to kind of control that we have multiple steps we animate through. Yeah, so we kind of go to the first step and then we go from there to the end. Okay. Bunch of questions and comments piled up again. I love your teaching, Max. Your voice is calming and easier to understand, even as a non-native person. I find your teaching extremely helpful. Loving these interactive streams. Thank you so much. Such an amazing feedback. Yeah, super happy to hear that my German accent can also be calming and that is helpful. So thank you so much. When learning new technical concepts through official docs, is it a good choice to use AI browsers? I think it's a good choice to use AI, yeah. I think you should still, like I'm doing it here, manually read through docs from time to time, but I'm reading through the docs here because that is what I personally like to do when I learn, because you catch all the nuances, you catch all the things that AI might leave out when giving you a summary. But what I do a lot is I still then go to AI and have a chat about the topic I'm learning, with or without the docs. If it's known well enough, I don't need to give AI a link to the docs or anything like this. So for example, here with that strange behavior of the transition, that would be a good example for also using AI. But at the same time, I want to like really read what the authors of a technology wrote to get their idea and not just a rough summary. But that is also my personal preference, to be honest. Strange that Max just suddenly does a live stream, and he recently just released a video on AI effects on Anthropic stuff workflow, but instead he's not addressing use cases of AI. Yeah, I'm not sure what to make of this comment. So I should only do AI stuff now? I mean, I do whatever I want and what I find interesting. And I have plenty of AI videos on my YouTube channel. But doing just AI, that's kind of boring, to be honest. So sometimes AI, sometimes not. And the good thing is, you can watch whichever videos and streams you like. Does animate maybe have an object property for easing? Well, I think you control the animation entirely through transitions. Transition, that is also how I understood the docs. What framework am I using? Yeah, the motion framework, and formerly it was called Framer Motion. But I do know, and I don't know where it is, that there is a way of changing the general style of animation. I just have to find it. So what else do we have here? Variance. Setting animate as a target is useful for simple single element animations. It's also possible to orchestrate animations that propagate throughout the DOM. We can do so with variance, a set of named targets. So how does this work? We could have like a variance object with essentially styles we want to animate and then identifiers of these different animation states. We can pass that to the variance property. Oh, and then we just tell it which variant should be active. So we could have something like animation variance. And we could have something like, I guess, stable, where we have rotate 0. And then we got spinning, where rotate is 360. And then instead of having the animate prop, we could have the variance prop and pass animation variance to it. And then what? And then we set an initial value and then control. Oh, okay. And then I can still use. Okay, so now I could use animate still, but in a different way. I could say is animating. Is animating. And then just use the variant name to kind of activate the respective values. And of course, that can be useful if you want to reuse that same configuration across multiple elements. That's my understanding, at least. Yeah. Okay, so now it again starts spinning, but that is how we could reuse that. Variants are useful for reusing and combining animation targets, but it becomes powerful for orchestrating animations for the trees. So what do we have here? Hello. Okay, this example. Oh, okay. It's a bit hard to click that. Okay, so what are we doing here? While in view, visible, initially hidden. We have our variance with opacity and the transform X value, like with the X shortcut here being animated for the items. But is that really the code for this animation? No. Yeah, okay. We got a whole different thing going on here. We got a stagger function here, which is also coming from the motion library, which is making sure that these children are staggered and are not animating at the same time, I guess. So I find it a bit weird that we get an example here that is totally different from the code above. So how does this work? We got our nav element, which is initially set to nothing, I guess, to false. And we animate between an open and a closed variant. And I don't know where the variants are defined, but I'm sure we'll find out. So we have these two variants, as it seems, which make this nav visible or invisible, I guess. And then we got the navigation component, which is this one here, which has the actual list and its own variants. And then we map through an array to render different menu items. And we get the item variants here. Menu item. And where is the staggering? Like the nav variants. Where is this being used? Here. That's what we pass to the unordered list. To have like an open and a closed variant where we transition and we say, okay, so I understand. So what we're doing here is for these variants, we say we want to set the transition property for this element and all its children, but for the children, for every children, we want to delay by, I guess that's in seconds, so by 70 milliseconds, so that their animations will only start after that delay staggered. So every child starts a little bit later than the child before. And then we got the variants for the children. So yeah, that's of course the transition is the configuration of how the animation plays. So it says we want to stagger. And then for these children, we got these values that we animate. So from Y0 to Y50, so that they slide down, I guess. Yeah, that's down. And from fully opaque to fully transparent. And because of that transition with the stagger, that will play for all the children, but with that delay between the children, I guess. So yeah, a quite complex example that's only partially related to this. But at least we now already got a glimpse of how staggering works. Oh, and here we got more. Here we got the explanation. By default, this children animations will start simultaneously, but with variants, we gain access to the new transition props when and delay children. Okay. So how can we rebuild this here? I think by getting rid of that, and maybe we can just rebuild it like this. So I'll just kind of do what they did. I guess that can be an unordered list. That can be a list item. And I do have a syntax error. That should be like this. So that will render a bunch of list items. And now let's see. Here I want to have like an open button. And I'll name this is open and set is open and handle open like this. And now I want to have a closed and a open. And actually here I'll use like X. Yeah, -100 to have them slide in from the left. And I'll pass my variance here. And initially it's closed, and then animate says, if is open is true, I want to switch to the open variant. Now, if I do it like this, you see the entire nav element, which is super ugly, I know, comes in from the left. And now if I want to stagger the children, I need to add that transition property. And I'm not sure. I do add it to... Okay, I do add it here, I think. So transition, delay, no, transition, yeah, delay children. But this does not exist here. Is this the wrong one? Oh, I want to have like, yeah, I don't have any type here. So what is the type? Is it variance? Yeah. Okay, so now I got type safety, right? Delay, yeah, delay children. And let's use 1 to make that super obvious. And I think we need that on the open variant actually. So, but that alone is not enough as it seems. Oh, when? Before children. Okay, so delay the children. And when do we want to do that? We want to delay before the children are rendered, I guess. Which other options do we have? We don't know. But okay, so this is still coming in 1 block. Let's also add this here for the initial transition. Closed, so that we're fully in line with that. Still coming in together. So how did they do it here? I mean, they used a totally different, they used a stagger function here in this example. But I guess that's only needed if then within the children you want to like have a delay. But for now, I'm fine with the children coming in 1 block, but I guess with a delay, which is not working right now. So here for the variants, they have just the transition, nothing else. And then they apply that to the list, which I guess is always visible therefore. And then they get these child variants. So maybe I need my child variants here. So that's how I want to animate my children. And now for the list, I'll therefore change this a bit. And then I want to have my child variants here. And how are they activated? The item variants. How do we switch from, oh, we have the same name, open and closed. So we have the same name here too. And since we read before that variance would be kind of passed through if we have the same name, closed and open. If the parent element switches, my understanding is that the child elements will also switch. So now, yeah, now we got some staggering going on. So now we got the list coming in, and then even without the stagger function, these child elements are coming in with that delay. And obviously, if I reduce that delay to something like 0.3, they're coming in like this. And this nice bouncy factor, by the way, is what I meant before, that I read that the motion library by default has this special way of animating elements that make them feel more natural, which is in general a good thing because most of the time you want that bouncy wobbly thing, and therefore that's a nice thing. You can definitely change it somehow. I don't recall how, but we'll get there. Java course, please. Yeah, I'm not a Java developer, so no course plan on that, to be honest. Is it possible to combine this with Material UI? I'm sure it is. Oh, well, I haven't used Material UI in like 7 years or 5 years or whatever, but I don't see why it wouldn't be possible. You can very likely do that. Hi Max, interesting topic that you're covering today. I delivered my front-end exam project last Sunday. Hopefully it gets enough points for passing the exam. I keep my fingers crossed, and thank you so much for the amazing feedback. Yeah, I'm happy to hear you're liking it. I'm liking it too, getting into animation, understanding a bit better what all that code does, which sometimes gets generated by AI without me fully understanding it. It's nice to understand it a bit better. I don't fully understand why they are using the stagger function here, though, because to me, it seems like it works without that. But I might be missing something here. I'm very likely am. Okay, but yeah, variants make a lot of sense. Like being able to like have a top level variant and then use variants of the same name with different properties on children combined with staggering. That is really like a powerful pattern. Animation controls. Declarative animations are ideal for most UI interactions, but sometimes we need to take manual control over animation playback. The use animate hook can be used for animating any HTML SVG element, so not just motion components. So if you want to make something animatable that normally wouldn't be, and then we can, yeah, so that's how we can then get programmatic access to starting and stopping. So basically what we saw before with the web API, I guess. By passing a motion value as the child of a motion component, it will render its latest value in HTML. So that's interesting now. And I'll follow along with their example and build a counter. And import my counter here. And let's actually add it here. Already getting an error. Why? Because this is not returning anything. Okay, so now we get a counter. And it's absolutely not readable. So let's change this. Okay, so now we got a count. Whoops, we got a counter here. And we can animate that number, if I understand it correctly, by creating a motion value. Now, what's a motion value? Motion values track the state and velocity of animated values. So we can animate numbers and text or so. Let's see, we create them with use motion value. So we should do that. Let's go here and have use motion value. And what can I pass to that? It takes an unknown value. So I could pass some text here. Interesting. So I can absolutely pass like a number, 0. And I can then output that, right? So maybe name this count. Count. No, I cannot output it like this. How do I output it? I output it by wrapping it with a motion component, I guess. Which makes a lot of sense if you think about it. So let's import the motion object and then have a motion paragraph here. And now I can render it. So now it's still a 0. But now we can animate this. How are they animating it? They are animating it with the animate function. Okay. So let's see. Let's copy that for now and then take a look at what's happening there. So they are using useEffect here, of course, which runs initially, and then they call animate to animate the count motion value, which is a value created with help of the motion library. So it's not a regular number. It's an object that's kind of wrapping the number and has all kind of magic stuff inside, I would imagine. And we're animating it. We're animating our motion value. We could have just passed a number in as well, and I guess it's then internally wrapped by a motion value. We can then pass our keyframes, or is that the number we want to animate to? Okay. Because count is a number, so here we can animate to that. And then we got options like the duration. And then we stop when that component is unmounted. But now my expectation would be that we animate from 0 to 100 over 5 seconds, and we output that here. And nothing happens. Maybe get is wrong. Yeah, okay. So now, okay. It's animating. So I guess, can we also like compute a value and say like count to fixed? No, we can't do that. It's also possible to animate numbers with a ticking counter effect using the animate number component. Oh, so so they got a special component for just having this ticking effect here, which is nice. But I think for motion values, how can we transform them? There is the use transform hook. Let's see. By manually creating values, you can set and get their state. Can I call get here and then use toFixed and output like this? But I think calling get does not give me the animation, right? Nah. Usage. How can I transform the way this is displayed? Because obviously it was working, I just don't want like all these decimal places. Motion component. What does use transform do? Use transform creates a new motion value that transforms the output of one or more motion values. So can I do something like use transform count? Like this? Yeah, okay. So I can, since it's a special value, I kind of have to transform it with use transform if I want to format it as it seems. But that's then a nice counter effect. And you might know that from various websites where they have like visitor numbers, which always animate up when you visit those sites. That's one way of achieving this, I guess. Okay, so that is the end of this animation page. But there also is the layout animation. That is quite interesting because the idea here is that you can animate layout changes. And the difference, of course, is that none of what we had here is a layout change. It might look like opening this menu is one, but in the end, the menu has its fixed place and we just animate its appearance. By the way, the library also gives us a way of animating the disappearance. It's probably also worth noting by wrapping it with animate presence. Because by default, if we animate a disappearance, it's just gone. So actually what we could do here to show this as well in app, we got closed and open already. Now handle open can become handle toggle, and we set this to what it's currently not. So now when we do that, we can open the menu and we can close it. And actually, it's already playing a close animation, which is a bit confusing because my understanding is that normally in React, the thing is just gone instantly, and you would have animate presence to animate the disappearance. But probably we're just animating those child elements now that I think about it. So let's give this a class with, let's say, a yellow background. Like this. So now we see that appears. But still that's really weird, I have to say. Why is this animated when it's disappearing? Because normally the problem should be that it disappears instantly, and by wrapping it with animate presence, you kind of stop that from happening and you tell it, hey, you first play that animation before you disappear. But for some reason, it's also nice that you can stop during the animation and it will just continue correctly. So, okay, I'll take it, I guess. Just not entirely sure why it's behaving like this. Probably related because of this setup. So if I would not have this, it's still animating. Okay. Yeah, I know what the problem is. Sure. These elements are always in the DOM. They are never removed. So, yeah, that's the thing. So if I switch this back to handle open, and this is true, and like this, and then I add a second button here, close. But in this one here, I want to remove the menu. So, menu visible, set menu is visible is my state. And when I click this close button, I want to call set menu visible, and I want to set that to false. And initially, let's say it's actually true. So that should control if the container, the DOM container, is in the DOM. So now if I wrap this, now with that, since it is true initially, that here will be rendered. So of course, if I click open, that plays as before. Now if now I remove the logic, but this would always stay in the DOM here, even before when I could still close this. It would animate out, but in the end, all that would do is it would just like set the opacity to 0, but the DOM element would still be there. Now, when I click close, the DOM element is removed, but as you see, it's instant. So if you want to animate that removal of a DOM element, like a user closing a modal or something like this, that is then where you need animate presence, which is another component you can get out of the motion library. And when you wrap something with animate presence, when that wrapped thing is removed, you get a chance of playing an animation by specifying an exit prop here. And there you can specify the values you want to animate to when closing. So for example, here I could say closed, my closed variant, and the CSS properties that are set for that variant, that's where I want to go to. Now with that, when I open, that's coming in. When I close, that's animating out, but now it's gone from the DOM. That's the difference. Okay, but now for the layout property, or the layout styling. Here the idea is that we can animate layout changes. So not changes like opacity or transform, but really the change in a layout, like for example here, it's a pretty good example where with Flexbox we change the place where something is positioned, and that is something you can normally not animate with CSS animations or transitions because it's a layout change. It's not like a visual only change. Obviously it has a visual impact, but it's a change in the layout of the document. It's in a different place physically, so to say. Whereas when using transform and translate X, translate Y, the DOM element actually stays where it was and it's just moving around visually. That's an important difference. So to see that in action, I'll actually comment out this code. And I guess all this code. And I'll add another div here with a class name of flex, rounded, full, some padding, and a slight yellow background. And in there, I'll add a div with a class name of BG red and also rounded full. And I want to give that a width of 200. Okay, so now we got this. Now let's say I want to move that red ball to the right and animate that. One way would be to use the animate property and then have my my x value for transform x, so for translating along the x-axis, and set this to 500 or something like this. And of course, that should be a motion div. It should not be a regular div. So it's a motion div. Then I animate this by let's say 300. And I then set this initial here to 0 and a duration of 1. And now if I reload, you see that's moving. That is moving here. But this is just like the visual animation. Sure, this is where we see it, but technically it's still in that flex box at the beginning, so to say. So if I had another div in there, let's say a blue ball, and I have justify here, I have like justify between. That blue ball here stays at the end. It's not moving anywhere. If I have justify start, it becomes even clearer. That blue ball stays here at the beginning, even though technically it's to the right of that red ball. But if I disable those animation things, you can see it's red and then blue. But when I animate the red ball, the blue one is not moving because the layout didn't change. It was just a visual change in the red ball, which often is fine, but sometimes might not be what you want. And that is where that layout thing comes in. So we can add a button again, I guess. Move ball. Handle move ball. Is moving or is moved, set is moved, and we call set, I want is moved. Set is moved to true and add that here. And now I don't want to use this, but instead I want to change my class here. So I'll have my updated CSS class here for the surrounding div, where is moved is changing. But now we can animate this by making this a motion div and this a regular div now, I guess. And by adding the layout prop, the layout changes implied by this change will be animated. That's my understanding. So first of all, I want to make that button a bit more visible. But it also didn't work. But that is the example here. Set is on. They're using a style, not a class name, but that should not matter, I guess. Oh, maybe that does need to be a motion div in there, though. Both of them. That would make sense. Nope. Oh, the inner, the things that actually move have layout, not the thing that changes. So I think that can be a regular div, the surrounding one. And the layout prop is not added on that, but on the ones inside, because these are the things that should move. These are the things that are being moved around. Yeah, so now that is animating. Now that is animating, and now that is what the layout prop can do. Now it's animating that layout change and not just the visual one. Did we start JavaScript Web Animations API yet? I had to drop for work meetings. Yeah, I took a look at that pretty early on in the stream, but no worries if you missed it. I'll upload this stream's recording, just like all my streams, to my second YouTube channel, Maximilian Schwarzmüller Extended. You find all recordings there, and this one will be up there tomorrow. Max, first off, thank you for all you do. I've taken your JavaScript course. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the nice words. Have you ever learned Moth as a self-taught developer? Did you teach yourself core CS stuff? Yeah, I have. So obviously, I learned Moth in school, and in Germany we have that system where you have you could choose certain deep dive courses, and I took Moth as one of these deep dive courses in school. So I learned a lot about Moth there, and I did also pick up a lot of Moth essentials for computer science specifically throughout all these years where I taught myself and worked as a software developer. That being said, I also will say that I don't find Moth as important for normal software development, or what is normal, but for web development specifically, as some people might think or might be afraid it is. It's probably more important if you're doing like game development or anything that's a bit closer to the metal, or where you're doing crazy 3D stuff and things like that. What would be the best animation library for React? I think Motion, the one we're using here, is pretty good. I think it's one of the most popular ones as far as I know. So that was layout. By using layout ID, not layout, but layout ID, it's possible to match two elements and animate between them for some truly advanced animation. So that's quite fun. Here we're talking about this border, which is sliding under these tabs. And this works. Let's take a look. This works. So we have our tabs. We got the list items. These are the tabs, I think. And then we got the div here. One div per list item. And that is the underline in the end. That's the div in this case. So it's not a border bottom. It's a separate element that is styled as a border bottom or as an underline. And that has a layout ID. And by having a fixed ID, as the selected tab changes, the movement of this element is animated. And we'll, of course, also try that ourselves here. So at the top here, yeah, that's fine. At the top here, let's say we build ourselves a very basic tabs thing where I have tab 1, 2, and 3. And these are, let's say, spans. And then my understanding is that I can add a div here like they do. Let's actually give this some styling. And we could put this in a separate component, but I deliberately want to have it like this here. So yeah, we can use that. We can use some padding. We'll give this some yellow background here. And we'll give that overall some background, maybe a bit darker. So that's my tabs area, maybe actually a bit lighter. Yeah, tabs area, and let's make those things here dark then to make those tabs visible. And obviously give them a white text. And obviously they're super ugly, but yeah, you get the point. So now we can copy and paste this so that all these tabs have that style, and then I can have my div here at the bottom, which I'll give a height of, let's say, 1 pixel, W full for full width, and then a red background. So now I got this border here. And when I have that in every element, or do I? I only want to have it in the active tab. So we'll add a handle set or select tab function. And on click, I'll select different tabs, tab 1, tab 2, tab 3. And I want to render this div conditionally. And we'll see if that is the right way to do it. I haven't looked at the docs, but I want to render that depending on which tab is selected. And obviously for that, I need a state selected tab and set selected tab here. So now when I click, we got different tabs. Now let's say we want to animate that border. My understanding is, and I'm probably wrong, but we'll see, that the way to do this is to make this a motion div and give it a layout ID that is then stable, that is the same, like active tab. We do that for all these tabs now. So we don't have different layout IDs, but always the same one. And now it's animating automatically. So this change is animating, and that is really mind-blowing, because technically what we're doing here is we got different elements being rendered. These are all different divs technically, and they're added or removed to the DOM based on this state. But because we have motion divs and we added this layout ID prop, which is coming from the motion package, of course, this is animated, which is of course pretty cool and a pretty easy way of having a nice effect like this, which would be pretty hard to achieve otherwise, I guess. So yeah, that is a pretty useful property as well. So what else do we have? Looks like we got a reorder animation. Shuffle. Oh, okay. Yeah, so they're shuffling the elements, the order of elements in an array, and then they're just outputting the array. And because we have layout ID on them, that movement is animated. That's what's going on here. So yeah, I got a shuffle function, which takes an array and returns a shuffled array where the order was changed. And this shuffle function is called on an array that we have, this array here. That's the array we have. That's shuffled every second with that use effect. And then it's just rendered here. So normally, without animation, those boxes would just jump around as they change the position. But since layout is on them, their change in layout is animated. Now, it's not layout ID here, because here the idea is not to share an element across different elements, but instead just to animate the change in layout again, what we had earlier. So it's pretty cool and pretty easy to achieve with that layout prop, I guess. Yeah. Yes, we got the shared layout animation here. Customize a layout animation by again setting the transition prop, what we saw before for animate. Okay, layout scroll, if you need to change or animate the layout change in a scrollable container. Okay. Group layout. Layout animations are triggered when a component re-renders and its layout has changed. But what happens when we have two or more components that don't re-render at the same time, but do affect each other's layout? So yeah, I was about to say like an accordion where you can like expand different elements. And you want to have the top element that is expanding animate, but you want to have it push down the element below. So you got multiple things where one of them is actually not animating. It's just affected by the animation of the other. And it looks like we can animate this with motion with the layout group. So let's take a look at that. Let's say we have another unordered list here. And I think I'll just use the quick and dirty way here. Yeah, I'll add a new component real quick. Detail item, which in the end is just a div with a button, show details, and it has its own state. And nope. And then we use isOpen to show the details. And on click should show or hide them. And therefore here I want to say hide or show details. And I want to have like a detail item here, like 3 of them. And yeah, some styling would be nice so that we can see them. So let's say here, what do we have? Does that make sense? Yeah, so now, well, let's actually give this a light gray, light gray background. And let's have a gap in between. So now we can see we get different items. And if I expand one, it's pushing down the other one. Now, my understanding is that I can now wrap this in a layout group to animate this, though the thing inside of the group probably also must be any group motion component. Yeah, must be motion components. So let's see, is it enough if I got a motion div here in the detail item? Like motion div, like this, and then the layout group here, like this, layout group. Let's see, hello. If I have it like this, no, that's not animating. How does it work? Oh, the divs in there must have the layout prop. That would make sense because they're of course changing their layout position and how they are. Yeah, so now, okay, it's a bit of a weird default animation, this stretchy thing, but that's something we can probably configure. But we can see that now the other parts here get pushed down through an animation. The part down here jumps because it's not in the layout group, but the layout group members, they are animated. Now regarding that weird, excuse me, the weird behavior, yeah, they can sometimes visually distort children. To fix distortion, they can also be given a layout prop. So I should convert this to motion elements. Yeah. So now this text is no longer stretching, but just the box is. Cool. So that's pretty nice. And I think that wraps up today's stream. So yeah, I did not get to GSAP. Probably something for a future stream, but we had a look at CSS and JavaScript, animations, transitions, at the web animations API, and now a quite extensive look at the motion library. I know a bit more about animations. I hope the stream was helpful and interesting. Not sure what I'll do next week, but I plan on streaming again. And yeah, thank you all so much for tuning in. Have a great day, evening, morning, whatever it is for you. And maybe I see you next week. And if you missed today's stream, you can watch it on my Maximilian extended YouTube channel I mentioned before. So, Have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.